This November, we elect a new governor. Right now, as we roll, April 26, 2017, run up to primaries, there are 17 hopefuls in all, 11 from the two major parties. Focusing on the Republicans, there's Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno, Nutley Township Councilman Steve Rogers, Ocean County businessman Joseph Rullo, Atlantic County Aerospace Executive Hirsch Singh, and our guest right now, Somerset County Assemblyman Jack Ciatarelli, small business entrepreneur and creator of a multi-point plan that he says can turn the state around. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, let's start right out. Governor Christie had a very similar campaign about turning the state around in 2008, and here we are. Property taxes haven't fallen, school funding is a powder keg, opiate abuse now, state's credit rating has dropped 11 times. We're paying more than ever for gasoline, so we have roads to drive on. So where do you want to start on that one?
Well, for all the reasons you just stated, we're on the brink. But let's go back to Christie for a second. 3 extraordinary accomplishments in his first 24 months. 2% property tax cap, teacher evaluation and tenure reform, and pension and health care reform for public workers, and a 78% approval rating. There was an opportunity to achieve more, but they got distracted by presidential ambitions, and we know how that ended. I guarantee the people of New Jersey I won't lose my focus. I have but one ambition, to turn this state around. And as an MBA, CPA, entrepreneur, business owner, I've put forth a very, very specific 5-point plan on how to do that.
Yes, your accounting background, your facility with numbers, how much is that influencing how you go about creating this plan and launching it?
Very much so, and I'll tell you why. The numbers don't lie. It's very, very easy when you lay it out mathematically for the people of New Jersey. And given the economic and fiscal crisis, and I'm not just saying this because Donald Trump won, but I think what people are looking for today is not a politician. I've served 2 terms at the local level, the Freeholder level, and now 5 years in the Assembly, but I've never not been in the private sector full-time since I came home from Seton Hall University with my MBA CPA. I've been in the private sector for 30 years full-time, the last 20 as a business owner, and as a CPA, solving the mathematical economic fiscal crisis comes very, very easy to me, and that's what the 5-point plan is really all about.
One of those points is school funding.
Yep.
Let's start there because everyone's worried about that.
And it's what drives the property tax crisis. Now listen, without a doubt we have a property tax crisis in this state in small part because there are 565 towns and 611 school districts. That's too much government. It leads to fragmentation, and fragmentation always leads to inefficiency. But the primary driver, Tom, of our property tax crisis is the school funding formula. The town that we're in right now, Toms River, a $350,000 house in this town pays more in property taxes than an $800,000 townhouse in Jersey City. You've got working class people in this town paying $15,000 a year to send their 3- and 4-year-olds to pre-K. Millionaires in Hoboken get pre-K for free because of the way we distribute school aid. We're making our suburbs poor because of the way that we distribute school aid. It's long overdue, it's blatantly unfair, it's terribly flawed. I actually think there's an aspect of it that makes it unconstitutional. The Equal Benefit Clause in our Constitution says no community is supposed to benefit at the expense of another. But I will tell you that Jersey City and Hoboken are benefiting at the expense of Toms River.
Okay, how are they accomplishing that?
By something called adjustment aid. And the first thing I always talk to is there's an adjustment aid clause in our current school funding formula law. But the first thing I always say is no government aid is ever meant to be a subsidy in perpetuity. Unemployment insurance is the perfect example. You get unemployed, I get unemployed, we can get 26 weeks of unemployment insurance compensation from the state in the hope that we get a job sometime during those 26 weeks. If we don't, you and I know what happens at the end of the 26 weeks, right?
Right.
What?
You don't have anything.
It stops.
Right.
School aid was supposed to be there as a bridge, a crutch, until communities could stand on their own 2 feet, until they revitalize. I tell you that Jersey City and Hoboken have revitalized, and yet despite that revitalization, their school aid has not gone down. It's gone up. It's been frozen because of adjustment aid. So point number 1 in my plan, we get rid of adjustment aid. A school district's state aid should go down as its own ability to pay goes up. We need to change that today. So the first thing we do is get rid of adjustment aid.
How does that then affect the entire house of cards on which it's built. You've got appointees, you've got employees, you've got salary amounts, you've got all sorts of, you've got administrators involved. From the lowest to the highest, everyone's depending upon that continuous flow of money. So what happens there?
Here's what happens. So for example, everyone knows this, because of this grandfather clause known as adjustment aid, Jersey City gets $160 million more in state aid than it should. Hoboken gets $7.5 million more in state aid than it should. Because they get all that state aid, the property tax levy raised through property taxes to pay for schools in those towns is comparatively low, particularly compared to a Toms River. Toms River is paying 70 cents on the dollar for its schools. Jersey City, 20 cents on the dollar for its schools. So what my plan says is this: hey, Jersey City, that $160 million, it's going to be decreased from $160 million to zero over a 5-year period. And we're going to take what we're now not sending you because of my reform, and we're going to send it to the Toms Rivers and the Parsippany's and the Bridgewaters and the Egg Harbor Townships. And that's how you bring equity to the school funding formula, and that's how you lower property taxes in Toms River, Egg Harbor Township, Parsippany, Bridgewater, and all throughout the state. And let me tell you why this reform plan will work. Because there are just as many, if not more, Democratic suburban towns that are disadvantaged by this policy that we currently have in place. And Democrats are beginning to wake up to what's going on, and they don't like it either.
Let's talk about the per student spending. Okay.
Would love to.
First of all, I'm not sure how we got to a point where we're actually equating the cost of educating each student and reaching that figure. And I'm not sure how that translates into actual efficiency. So how would you reorient this? Do you stick by that kind of hard dollar amount per student? Does that work for you? And if not, what does?
So first and foremost, do you realize in some towns like Asbury Park, where the cost per student is $37,000, that's more than what it would cost any one of our children to go to Rutgers, full-time, including room and board. Think about that for a second.
I have.
It's crazy, is it not? It is no wonder in this state we have the highest K-12 funding in the nation, but yet our higher education system is one of the most underfunded. Why? We're spending so many dollars in K-12 in places like Jersey City, Hoboken, and Asbury Park. There's not enough money left over to make college less expensive in the state. Here's what we need to do, very specific to your question. A lot of people don't know this. Those towns that have a great many kids on the free and reduced lunch program, the state says the spending target therefore has to be no less than $22,000 per student. And for a town that has few free and reduced lunch children, because there isn't much poverty, they shouldn't be spending more than $12,000 per student. And those spending targets affect how much aid a town gets, how the aid is distributed. I tell you, those two things are terribly distorted. The $22,000 has to come down and the $12,000 has to come up, and that will better and more equitably distribute state aid. So that's another point in my reform plan.
Assemblyman, Lieutenant Governor Guadagno has her own plan, which would involve property tax cuts as high as $3,000 if someone's paying more than 5% of household income on school taxes. You see any holes in that, or are there aspects of that you can actually work with?
It's filled with holes, and that's not just because she's my opponent in the primary. If you learn anything in business, never ever promise a client or a customer something based on an assumption. The Lieutenant Governor herself has admitted that this is an expensive plan that will cost no less than $1.5 billion a year. And she's going to find the $1.5 billion by doing state audits to identify $250 million in phantom savings. And she's hoping that there'll be revenue growth to pay for another $1 billion of her plan. Now, these revenue growth assumptions is what has caused 11 credit downgrades in New Jersey over the last 7 years. We have revenue shortfall after revenue shortfall after revenue shortfall. So I think that, quite frankly, the plan is the height of irresponsibility. I think there's some pandering going on with respect to it. There's not a single aspect of my plan that is based on an assumption. It takes the pot of money we currently have to work with and distributes it in a more equitable manner. And by the way, anybody that's talking about property tax relief in this state without first talking about fixing our failed, flawed, unconstitutional school funding formula is telling a lie. You can't address property taxes in this state until you fix the current school funding formula and the distribution of state aid. And the Lieutenant Governor hasn't done that.
So we're talking about the Supreme Court ruling now.
Well, there are things the Supreme Court does not know. I don't think the Supreme Court knows that a $350,000 house in this town pays more than an $800,000 townhouse in Jersey City. The Supreme Court does not know that middle-class folks in this town are paying through the nose for pre-K, and millionaires in Hoboken are getting it for free. And I intend to attack from the left. If need be, I'll bring this argument before the Supreme Court, which is a very different argument. But I actually believe if I'm victorious, because I've been this specific throughout my campaign, from the day I announced last October about how to fix the school funding formula, and because there's a great many Democratic suburban towns that are disadvantaged by it, I think I can get the support I need in the legislature to make my plan work.
One of the individuals who fully gets what you're doing is Paul Mulshine, and I respect him a great deal, and I saw that you reposted on Twitter his entire dissertation on the Guadagno plan vis-a-vis the Ciatarelli plan.
There are few people in this state that understand the current school funding formula through and through. Paul Mulshine is one of them. And I appreciate the fact that he debunked the Lieutenant Governor's plan.
Now, your proposals with regard to taxes lean toward tax breaks, reductions, eliminations, but how do you change state government spending in order to go that route?
Well, point number 4 in my 5-point plan deals with downsizing state government. It is outmoded.
Well, I was waiting for this one.
It is outmoded, it is antiquated, and I'll give you examples, because I think the examples are always powerful, because I don't want to be one of these candidates that just talks in platitudes and generalities. I've got 2 motor vehicle agencies in my district. Last summer, the lines were 3 hours out the door. I called motor vehicles. What's going on? They told me computer glitch. I said, can you be more specific? They said our hardware and software systems are more than 20 years old, and our desktops are on DOS. It's funny.
On DOS.
On DOS. It's also embarrassing. Other states have implemented a complete state-of-the-art, modern, state-of-the-art internet technology to skip the trip. You don't have to go to motor vehicles for anything. I will downsize state government, and I will not take those savings and give it to people as an income tax cut or a homestead property tax rebate 2 days before the election, which New Jersey's famous for. I will reinvest it in state government, modernize it, streamline it, and make it more efficient for citizens and businesses to interface with state government. Motor vehicles is not alone. Treasury is on DOS. We need to modernize our state government. It's an embarrassment.
You want to talk about reductions in workforce, though. I mean, Len Connors was talking about this 15 years ago. And I know there have been some gains. Do you see more gains that can be done?
Yes, we need to reform civil service, and I believe with the right type of computer technologies, we can downsize our force significantly. Now, I do not celebrate putting people out of work. I'm not cold-hearted. However, as a business person, I could tell you that before the recession, I employed 30 people. Post-recession, I employed 20 people. And last year, we had one of the best years we ever had. I have a responsibility to taxpayers to make sure that our government is modernized, streamlined, and cost-efficient. That's my obligation to taxpayers. They're like the shareholders in a corporation.
What happens to all those people who then are on the 26-week unemployment line?
Well, here's what we believe in this particular country. Capitalism, the creative destruction of capital, people find a way. People find a way.
Can we talk about pensions and health coverage?
I'd love to.
Okay. First of all, are all public worker unions included in your plan?
So the state is responsible for state workers, 65,000, and school teachers. It is not necessarily as responsible for municipal workers, county workers, police and fire, and the like. However, that's not to say that we can't pass sweeping law of the land legislation as we did in 2011 on pension and health reform. But here's where I would start. I refuse to go to the taxpayers of this state for another dime to make our pension system solvent. We have to take all people with less than 10 years of employment in the state and our school systems and put them in a cash balance plan. All new hires have to go into a 401k. And all current and future retirees whose pension plus Social Security is more than $50,000, On a sliding scale, they have to begin to contribute toward their own post-retirement health care benefit. Those three things alone provide me with enormous financial flexibility. And I've promised all the unions and the state workers that every penny I save from those three little reforms, I will put back into the pension. I've done pension and profit sharing plan accounting as a CPA. You have to reduce the long-term unfunded liability, you have to decrease the current expense, and increase the current payment. And that's how you point the system towards solvency. We have to deal with the reality, Tom, that the post-retirement health care benefit has tripled in the last 10 years. And with people living in their 80s and 90s, is no longer sustainable. One of the reasons why we don't make the full pension payment is because on a cash basis, we're paying for the post-retirement health care benefit for hundreds of thousands of retired public workers. Now, my mom's 85. My dad's deceased, but she collects his pension. He worked 38 years on the line for public service. She worked 33 years on the line for J&J. She collects his pension, and her Social Security. And those three checks add up to $27,000 a year. She's medically intensive as a stroke survivor, so she opted into Medicare Part B, which means $109 a month is deducted from her Social Security check. She gets $109 less a month of spending because it's deducted from her Social Security check to be in Medicare Part B. I've got retirees from the state and from school districts whose pension plus Social Security, and don't forget the taxpayers paid one half the Social Security,
Right.
whose pension plus Social Security will be $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. Do you know what their out-of-pocket expenses for their post-retirement health care benefit?
No.
Zero.
Yeah. And that leads to the other question. How are you going to be able to convince people? First of all, what does that do to the quality of the workforce? Because I can go to any 10 public workers I know, and they're going to tell me that they're in it for the pensions and the benefits. So
I do not
how does that
believe,
change anything?
I do not believe that the caliber of candidates who will apply for jobs with these kinds of policies, which are on par in the private sector, I do not believe the caliber of candidates all of a sudden goes down and we won't have high quality people working in our school districts in our state. I don't believe that. Second of all, the tragedy of all tragedies would be on January 1st of 2027, the pension trust is broke and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pension checks do not get mailed out. So what I've said to the public worker is this: do you want us to save the pension? The way to do that is with these kinds of reforms. And I think these reforms, quite frankly, are very fair to the young worker, because here's what's happening with our pension system. It's becoming transgenerational, like Social Security. I mean, everyone knows that you and I, our Social Security is paying for my mom's Social Security. And the hope is that our kids' Social Security payments will pay for ours. Pensions were never supposed to be transgenerational. It's unfair to the young worker.
Ms. Ellerman, you speak on your webpage of regulations, killing jobs, reducing New Jersey's competitiveness. Can you specify?
Let me give you an example of what goes on, for example, in residential real estate. If you own a 3-family unit or more, any type of residential unit that houses 3 families or more, apartment buildings, you're subject to state inspection. But every one of the municipalities also does an inspection. And the landlord has to pay for both of those. That seems terribly unfair to me. If you own a supermarket, State Consumer Affairs is coming in and doing weights and measures. And the next week, who's coming in? The county weights and measures. We've got to stop this kind of redundancy in New Jersey that makes us #1 in the nation in terms of the worst business climate. And there's example after example after example. Now, I don't know every industry real well. I was with the New Jersey Bankers Association last week, and I said, here's what I'm not going to allow you to do if I'm governor. I'm not going to allow you to tell me that our business climate stinks. You're going to have to back that up with 3 regulation examples that you want reformed, and I will work to reform them. So let's just stop walking around saying our business climate stinks. It does. But that's like my kids coming home and saying, I've got a bad teacher. No. Let's get a little more specific as to why you got a C in that class. And I think that's what we need to start doing in New Jersey. Let's take a positive approach to how to fix New Jersey from a regulatory standpoint. Give the policymakers specific examples of things that need to be changed in order to improve our business climate.
What about the workers in those businesses? What about what they're earning per hour? $15 minimum wage out of the question, or somewhere above where it is now, Up to 15? What do you think?
$15 is out of the question for me. I do believe the minimum wage needs to be raised from where it currently is, which is somewhere around $8.38 or $8.41, whatever it is, up to $10 over the next couple of years. But the notion of this first of all, building this into the Constitution, that's not what you do to a Constitution. I think an executive branch and a legislative branch every 5 to 7 years should revisit the minimum wage. But the notion of going to $15 an hour, this burden to small employers particularly, mom and pop shops on Main Street, which is what drives the New Jersey economy and our labor markets, is absurd. It's absurd. I'm not saying that someone can achieve all of their American dreams by earning the minimum wage, but let's not forget, the minimum wage is used for entry-level positions for people to learn skills and then work their way up the ladder. And so I think the best way to raise people's wages is to create an economy in which employers have to compete for the labor market, the labor pool. That's the best way to raise wages, not by having a very, very heavy-handed intervention like a $15 minimum wage. I guess what we're saying now is that my 15-year-old son who bags groceries at the local produce shop at Surf City in the summer is now going to be paid the equivalent of $30,000 a year to bag groceries? Is that what we're saying? I'm not so sure that's what's best for New Jersey.
So I see the tie between lightening up the regulations and streamlining that, what that does for business economically and how that then translates to the worker.
Yes. But more importantly, Tom, if you look at point 3 in my plan, we desperately need to restructure our tax code. It's another reason why we're #1 in the nation in terms of worst business climate.
Where do you see the biggest problem?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure the estate tax stays abolished, because I'm hearing talk already of reversing the reverse. It was abolished with that gas tax deal we had this summer, which I thought was bad public policy. But we need to make sure that there is not an estate tax. I believe in an estate tax at the federal level, but there's no room for an estate tax at the state level. More importantly, we need to get rid of transfer and inheritance taxes. Those touch way more New Jerseyans than does the estate tax. I think we need to stop taxing the gain on the sale of a home. It's not a stock or a bond. It's your home. I think we need to stop taxing the gain on the sale of a second home. How many New Jerseyans own a bungalow at the Jersey Shore, paid property taxes for municipal, county, and school services they never used? And yet when you go to sell that second home in New Jersey, what do? We tax it.
We tax it.
We need to allow for the carry forward of capital losses. We need to allow for accelerated depreciation. Here's something else that drives me nuts about New Jersey that I will change as governor. Let's say you decide to replace a 30-year-old bathroom in your house. You generated revenue for the town by paying for the permit fees. You spurred the economy with the investment. And the moment you get the CO from the town, what does the town do?
They reassess it.
They reassessed and raised your property taxes. You didn't increase your footprint. You didn't increase the square footage of your house. You merely replaced a 30-year-old bathroom with a brand new bathroom. I say that's criminal. It's criminal. We'll stop taxing the gain on the sale of a family-owned business in New Jersey. Watch entrepreneurship take off here. Someone starts a salon, a pizzeria, or a laundromat with $50,000 or $60,000, slaves away for 15 or 20 years, and now has an opportunity to sell it for $250,000. Let them pay their capital gains to the feds, but there should be no capital gain payment to the state of New Jersey. Those people drove our economy, drove the labor markets, slaved, that's their 401k. I also believe we have to phase out the corporate business tax. It's less than 10% of our revenues in Trenton, and the optics of it are terrible. It's declining every single year because fewer businesses are incorporating here. Phase it out. 1% a year over a 10-year period. I prefer that as opposed to all of the corporate welfare that we give corporations to bribe them to stay or to come. And the CPA in me has to balance the ledger now.
Yeah.
So in the early years before this plan has the ability to take effect over a mid to long term in terms of changing our economy and creating jobs, that's what it will do. We need to close corporate loopholes, and we need to restructure our marginal tax rates. And I have run this plan by everyone, including people of the highest net worth in New Jersey, and everyone has said, sign me up.
Interestingly enough, though, you're really talking about changing a mindset, a culture that's so deeply ingrained in the state that entire political systems work on.
We have
You want to turn off the taps. Are you just putting in other taps, or how are you?
Not at all. This tax restructuring and my 5-point plan in its entirety will change the perception and brand of New Jersey. Now, right now, we're the Queen Mary, and you know how hard it is to turn it around in open sea? We're navigating the Hudson right now. That's how challenging we are with our current situation. But I'm telling you that we can turn it around. I believe this. And listen, I've done extremely well in this state. Don't get me wrong, I've worked hard. But as the son of someone who didn't graduate, an immigrant family whose father didn't graduate high school, I've lived the American dream here in New Jersey. I don't need this job as governor. But I want it because I see an opportunity to turn around. And the last thing you ever want to tell Jack Ciatarelli is that something can't be done. It motivates me. But I'm motivated to turn this state around. 62% of New Jerseyans think we're heading in the wrong direction, and 7 out of 10 are looking to leave. You know how hard it is to grow an economy when your population is stagnant and getting older? People will go where they believe they can achieve their American dream. And millennials in particular, we need to come home. Many are going out of state to college and then don't come home because they don't believe they can achieve their American dream here in New Jersey. We've got to change that as soon as possible.
One of the reasons people are leaving is the crime rate and the opiate situation and the flow of illegal guns on the streets. Have you taken any time away from the ledger book to look at that? Where are you with that?
It's certainly an issue, especially the heroin opioid epidemic.
Especially in Ocean County.
Especially in Ocean County. It's nationwide, but it's particularly in states that are closest to the Atlantic because these drugs are coming in from the Middle East and somehow make their way via Route 80, via Route 78 and 195 out here into the suburbs. I applaud what the governor did with his State of the State. He called urgent attention to this matter because it is a crisis. People are dying each week. And I applaud, it's amazing how quickly Trenton can work, by the way. I applaud the legislature because within 10 days of his State of the State, a number of bills were on his desk to address the opioid heroin epidemic. The one thing I would like to see, because as my wife and I as parents of 4, I think a great many parents are oblivious to what's going on in the community, if not in their own home, if not in their own medicine cabinet with leftover drugs. I think we need a bit more education for parents today.
And Senator, you touched on something a little while ago, and I just want to circle back to it, and that was this all-consuming need to turn everything into a constitutional change. This is not long-standing. This is recent. What's driving that, and why does everything have to become a constitutional issue now? And how do you stop them from doing that if you're the governor?
What's driving that is a frustration with something that the majority should not be frustrated with, the democratic process. The fact of the matter is we have a governor, we have a legislature. And just because the legislature can't get its way with the governor doesn't mean that they should turn around and start putting everything on the Constitution, like the minimum wage. They did that a couple of years ago by building minimum wage into our Constitution that it should be indexed for inflation. But because inflation is less than 2% a year, they didn't like that the minimum wage was growing at such a slow rate. So now they've turned around and said, well, let's amend it again, this time for $15 an hour. There's a very foul word that I'll use because I think people understand it. Bastardization. We should not be doing this to our Constitution. It's sacrosanct. That is not to say that from time to time there are issues that should be built into our Constitution, but not the ones that have. Not the ones that have. Another example of this was a couple of years ago, something I voted no on, that a portion of the corporate business tax should be used for open space. If corporations are going to pay business tax in this state, let it be used for corporate retention, corporate recruitment, and an improved economy, not for open space. But that's built into our Constitution now. That's a bastardization that I just can't go along with. There's a democratic process in place. Just because a governor can't get his way with the legislature, or more so because a legislature can't get its way with the governor, doesn't mean we should continue just repeatedly to tinker with our Constitution.